Dave Drum and Ben Garcia as they explore the raw, honest, and nuanced experiences of modern spiritual men. Here is something to chew on.
Is a hot dog a sandwich?
Absolutely not.
Wait, no. By definition,
It's not.
No.
So you tell me you take a sausage and you put it in a bun, you now have a breakfast sandwich.
I'm saying if you look at Webster Merriam's dictionary, it's a two slices of bread. They even specify roll in the definition.
Okay. But then it's a hoagie, not a sandwich.
Well, it's a steak sandwich, which is the same thing as a hoagie.
It's not a steak sandwich. It's a cheesesteak.
No, it's a cheesesteak.
We don't even address
sandwich.
the bread.
No, it's
not. Where have you ever seen it listed at? And you said 2 pieces of bread and
or a roll. It definitely says bun.
Roll.
It says bun or roll or something. I mean, we can obviously pull it up.
Why is it not just like a meat taco then?
I mean,
a hot dog is a meat taco. How is it not a taco?
I guess then you're getting into the technicality of what kind of bread it is.
Exactly.
Right.
So you telling me if I fold pizza in half, it's a pizza sandwich?
I guess by the definition of Merriam-Webster, it would be.
Well, Merriam and Webster clearly never got out much.
Right. Where are we going with this, Dave? Are we talking about unity? Are we talking about disagreement or what?
Well, apparently we're talking about both.
Yeah, nice shirt, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. So, last episode we had this whole conversation about, friendship and we kept talking about that like 30-year friendship thing. And I just think it's completely implausible to think that you could have a 10 or 20 or 30-year friendship where you don't have some disagreement.
Absolutely.
Which I think is what kind of birthed the idea for this episode, is just that the idea that you can have disagreement and not have disunity.
Right.
And so we can disagree about the fact that you're wrong about the sandwich.
Or that I just went with the definition, but anyway, I digress. Continue, sir.
But, I think that the question then becomes, especially in our culture today, this idea of disagreement almost equaling disunity, because I think that the predominant theme in culture, you watch a sports program, sports commentary, or you watch political, our society seems to thrive off this idea of, let me get the most conservative guy and the most liberal guy and put him in the room just to watch him argue. And not only just to watch him argue, but like the predominant thought process isn't oh man, I don't know, I disagree.
Yeah, or I never thought of it from that way.
Yeah, exactly. But it's I don't even have to win. I just need to make sure you don't. So and in order for me to win, you have to lose.
You have to lose. Zero-sum game. Yeah, I agree.
I think, unfortunately, that's starting to trickle into our society from the standpoint of, we see that on TV, we see that in the news, and we start to treat relationships like that. Well, we had a falling out over X, Y, and Z, so now we don't really talk anymore.
Yeah.
Well, or maybe you guys could just agree to disagree.
Agree to disagree, yeah.
And
go ahead.
Just that thought of, it is, I don't think we see this anywhere else, this adversarial approach to relationship, where I have to, my opinion is the only one that matters. My opinion is the one that is going to be seen as right. And it just doesn't make any sense. And, looking through the biblical lens, the go-to for a lot of guys,
right.
In Proverbs, iron sharpens iron, so one friend sharpens another.
Yeah.
And, I say it all the time, is if we're talking about iron sharpening iron, like, there's friction, there's sparks, there's heat. Like, it's not a gentle process.
Yeah. You don't, and I think you don't want somebody that agrees with you all the time in your life. You want your close people to be able to see those blind spots, and they're gonna put their finger on that wound a little bit. It's gonna hurt, and I think that's a good thing. if you're willing to accept it. I think that many times when there's disagreements, for me and my wife, we always figure when we disagree, it's because somebody's not getting their way. When you're in a heated argument with somebody, you either want their affirmation or you want them to see it your way. You want them to be able to look at your side of it and tell you that you're right, I think.
It's funny to hear you say that. It's like my brain goes, nobody is going to go, I am right all the time. Everything I say is of the utmost value. Yet we argue our points as if we're the only one who sees this correctly.
We know it all.
It couldn't possibly be that I'm wrong.
No.
And if you're watching this, you're like, well, but I was right about that argument.
Right.
And that argument. And that argument, and that argument.
Yeah.
But so we argue like we're right all the time,
right,
even though it's actually impossible.
Well, and talk about I was right. That kind of leads into some of like, what kind of a relationship are you in when we're talking about this disagreement? If we're just disagreeing with a stranger at a football game, no, that was a foul. No, it wasn't. Whatever, and.
It's always a foul when they hit Mike.
That's it, right? But that wasn't a holding call on my team. But you interact with somebody like that a lot different than you act with your close friends or your family or your wife, and being able to not necessarily, it's that I'll leave it. I don't need to win that argument to win with the relationship. If you know that you're right in your mind or whatever, and the other person won't let it go, maybe there's just you being that bigger person in that moment and just admitting like, all right, you can have this one, let's just move on for the sake of the friendship, Well,
and I think I think you see that a lot of times in church debates, or faith-based debates. For the more nerdier types, the apologetics, if you want to call it,
yeah.
where I watch some of these guys and they can win the argument. They can logically out argue you about a topic, but in the end, you've won the argument. You've lost the person. You've lost the relationship. You've lost the ability to speak into this person's life. Like, wow, good job.
Where's the value in that?
Yeah, exactly. And I heard a pastor say once, if two people are alike all the time and agree on everything, one of them isn't necessary.
That's a pretty bold statement.
Like, if I just don't see how you can agree on everything all the time. And my wife and I don't agree on everything all the time.
You guys have like the epitome of marriage, man. You guys are awesome.
That just means
you know when to zip it.
You're blind. No, so it's you're always going to have those agreements or disagreements, and I just don't think you can have healthy relationships without healthy disagreements. But I think, like most things that we talk about, when we have our conversations, is you have to do a little self-evaluation first. Like, what are your motives? How are you approaching this relationship? That you're always right. You're the better parent. You're the better spouse.
Why is this making me feel this way?
Yeah. Maybe I'm not getting what I want in this moment. That's not necessarily a selfish thought, not always a selfish thought. Sometimes it might be, but you need to have that self-evaluation. And, when we're talking about biblical concepts, it's this idea of humility and love versus, just that selfishness. Because, the famous, even those outside the church really know the 1 Corinthians 13, the
love verse.
The love verse. You used to hear it at weddings. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is, it doesn't envy. It doesn't boast. But really what it comes down to is love is humility in relationship, and because love is thinking of the other person first.
Putting the other person above yourself.
And it's that desire to see them win. Like, what if we went into those relationships? You can have an opposing view, but still want the other person to win. And it's I think the approach of, again, the societal perception that hate is the opposite of love, but I don't believe it is. I don't think love and hate are opposites. I think, because again, love is thinking of the other person first. I think pride is and I've heard people talk about it, that pride is the opposite of love, because if you really get into it, you think about it, if love keeps no record of wrong, and love, isn't self-seeking, and it's not easily angered, you look at pride is impatient, it's not kind, it envies, it boasts, it dishonors, it's self-seeking, pride is easily angered. So when we're talking about bringing that mentality into relationships and disagreement, how you can still have unity even when you have disagreement, it's that approach of why did I get so angry so easily? Because that's not love talking, that's pride talking.
Yeah, you said thinking of the other person first, and that's hard for a lot of us, and it brings up that other, kind of biblical principle that as men, I've been in a lot of men's groups, I've led a lot of men's groups, it's die to self. One of our big things that I tell guys, I try and teach my boys, is that you're not the most important person, and the relationship, the friendships that you have are way more important than you being right or you getting your way or whatever it is. That die to yourself in every way, every day is key to maintaining those relationships and putting that other person first. Kind of having their best in mind is a great way to live. I think that it's really an important part for us to try and live that out every day in a very practical way. That is not hard to do. I mean, it's not easy at times, but if you keep that mentality, like...
Yeah, the concept's not hard.
Right.
The application is...
I think of it like we take up our cross every day. Okay, well, what's your cross? Well, maybe today that cross is different than it was yesterday. Maybe today I'm just feeling prideful, and I just need to understand that there's something in me, maybe I didn't sleep well, or maybe I got some bad news, or maybe there's some other thing going on in my life that the world doesn't know, and I'm working through that, and somebody says something to me and pushes a button, and now my pride swells up. I'm in defense mode, and the disagreements are just on. I disagree with everybody in those moments where I'm just, for whatever reason, I'm not communicating well with other people, and being able to recognize that, reset, like, okay, what do I need to die to in this moment today?
So again, we're back to that self-evaluation, self-awareness, and realizing in that moment, whatever is going on in my head actually is not as important as the value of the other person who I'm addressing.
Value, yes.
And I think, again, one of culture's insidious things that exist is how quickly we categorize other people. So, and I don't think we do it intentionally, but when we categorize them as they're just fill in the blank, it allows us to dismiss them and dismiss the value that they bring,
devalue them as humans.
As humans, as I think it's impossible to value their input, to consider their thoughts, if you have already degraded them as and created them as an unequal to us,
right? A predisposition to their
to their inadequacy.
Yeah,
like, oh, that that guy's an idiot because he's a bad driver.
Right. Or like a homeless person, we look down on them. The panhandler, you pull up to the thing, like, man, roll the window up. I'm not giving to this guy today. I just saw somebody throw him a 20, so he's good. He'll survive. And that's immediately devaluing them as a person. That is immediately not taking care of the widows and the orphans, as we're commanded to do.
Well, and even then, I feel like that's almost an extreme. I don't know that it's that extreme, but if it's the guy in your office.
But a folding a pizza in half isn't an extreme. Come on.
To call that a sandwich is just dumb. I didn't say you're dumb. That taking that stance is kind of dumb. It is kind of stupid. No, but like the guy in your office, like you guys.
Wait, I'm getting something. We need to go to break. Okay. We're hearing from the producers. We need to go to break. We'll be back with something to chew on. All right, we're talking about socks for life, the socks that are too comfortable. Tired of socks that don't love your feet enough? At Socks for Life, we believe your feet deserve more. Our socks are so soft, so snug, that you might never want to take them off. In fact, we highly recommend you don't. You'll feel like you're walking on clouds forever. Get your first pair today. Socks for Life.
I don't want to talk to you. I can talk at you. I'm not going to talk to you. Talking to you would require me to see you as a person. I almost feel like that has to be included. I think I have it. I don't know that I've read it.
Yeah.
I read a lot of books like halfway through or 2/3 of the way through because I feel like the last third of most books,
just recap.
You're just recapping. It's like, okay, we talked about this. Moving on. Besides, I got this other book I want to read.
Right.
No, I think so. Before the break, we were getting into this idea of seeing others with some level of equality.
Yeah.
So you brought up the homeless guy situation and how we view them, but do we, when we look at a peer, someone who society would say this is a peer, they work in the same office, you guys are on the same level, same pay, you live in the same neighborhood, so all these equalities, how quickly, because we don't like this guy and we don't want to value his input,
right? How
quickly we will lump them into he's a Democrat or he's a Republican or he's one of those kind of guys, he takes his politics too seriously or he doesn't take them seriously enough. And the reality is, we've all been victim of this. He's a church guy. Don't invite him.
Right.
He's no fun. He's a church guy. Or he's hot-headed, So again, we categorize the person, we lump them into something because that allows us we can dismiss anything they say as a result of where they're from, what they choose their politics to be,
right,
what they identify as. We lump them into those groups and it allows us to dismiss them completely.
Yeah, which goes against what we are, as Christian men, we are called to do. When we think about being a Christian man and modeling that to people in our lives, our prime example is Jesus and how he loved everybody and met them, whether it's the Samaritan woman at the well or the leper or the Pharisees that he talked to. And he spoke to each one of them differently in a way that would, kind of get on their level, So we need to remember to love each other as Jesus loves and value people as Jesus. That's one of the biggest things at our church that they, our lead pastor talks about. How can you add value to every situation? I haven't graduated to that part yet. I'm still working on valuing people. I'm a work in process, but, another big, a heavy hitter in the Bible is Paul, and he talks about disunity and disagreement in his letters multiple times. He reproves the Corinthians for their quarreling and divisions in First Corinthians. He warns against the Galatians' rivalries, divisions, and dissensions within their church. And I think we could go off on that for another hour. He instructs the Colossians, forgive each other as the Lord has forgiven you. And I think part of that valuing people, part of understanding another person's point of view is wrapped up in that right there. Forgiving each other as the Lord forgives you. When we talked about at the beginning self-evaluation or being self-aware. And when I look at everyone else through the lens of all the stupid stuff that I've done in my past, and how much my Heavenly Father has forgiven me for, I don't think there's anything you can say to me, short of, wanting me to die, that I can't forgive. I mean, when you look at Jesus literally died on a cross for us, and he did that for me to sit here right today and talk to this podcast and have this conversation with you. And there's nothing that somebody can do throughout my day that can equate to that.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, listening to you talk about, like, there's these biblical commands, and obviously we're both Christian guys. We talk about we talk about these different episodes and stuff we have in the works and stuff like that is all filtered through this lens of Scripture. And what I would say is, if you're watching this and you're not really sure where you land on that spectrum, there is value in the principles behind these things.
Yeah.
Because if you want to have influence, if you're just looking at it strictly from a secular point of view, these principles still have value.
100%.
To treat people well and to be seen as someone who's respectable and respectful towards others. There's a value to it. And I think too often those of us inside the church we face harsher criticism for it anyways.
We claim to understand it.
Yeah.
And that's interesting you say that too, because there's a level of people that look at Christians as, well, they have it all together, or you should be living this way because you claim to be that. When you and I both agree, like, hey, I'm a Christian because I know I can't do it by myself. I've screwed it up so bad on my own that I needed.
Oh, the Dave Drum show is horrible.
Right.
Horrible. I've seen it.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so bad.
Oh, mine is not much better. I mean, we can talk testimonies and stuff like that, but I think that people outside of the church view people inside of the church as these moral high ground people, and for us to be able to say, hey, yeah, I do try to hold myself to a moral standard, but I fail, and I fail repeatedly, sometimes more often with the people I love the most, than the stranger that I held the door open for at 7-Eleven, So I think that misconception of church people, having it all together or something is something that previous generations gave to us.
Well, it's funny, like, even your church people, it's like, there we are, we're categorizing people,
Right?
Church people, not church people. And what's funny is, here you went through this list and you're talking about, Galatians, where Paul's warning against rivalries and divisions in the church. We are supposed to be one body, the church universal, regardless of denomination. The church universal is supposed to be one body with Jesus as the head who leads us. He's the high priest. He's the end all be all before we get to God.
Yep.
And it's so. What's funny is the only people that I've encountered that really see, regardless of denomination, regardless of practice, regardless of theology that sees church people as one group of people, it's people outside the church. Because you talk to somebody and
Wow.
and they're like,
Yeah.
oh, you church people are all the same.
Yeah.
And what do we do inside the church? No.
No.
We're not like those weird churches down the street. Like, we don't do that stuff.
Right.
Or, oh yeah, we're not as bad as this denomination over here. And I'm intentionally being vague.
Right.
Because it's why we're inside the church and we are lopping off limbs like those guys. No way, man. They don't do outreach. They do outreach too much.
Right.
Oh, that church down the street, man, they're just a little too crazy for us. I like it a little more calm. So we start just chopping ourselves to pieces.
Right.
Meanwhile, the people outside the church are like, you guys are all the same.
All of you.
So, I mean, here's the thing. If you're watching this and you've made it this far, and you've had that negative encounter with a denomination, a particular group of people in a church, man, two things. Well, probably more than two things.
We'll start with two.
They're broken people.
Yeah.
Everybody inside the church is broken.
Absolutely.
So they're going to make mistakes. They're going to say things they shouldn't. We will say things that we shouldn't.
Daily.
So I apologize for that on their behalf, even if they're the ones who should apologize. And I apologize for my role in it, wherever it is.
I was wondering if you were going to throw that one in there.
But the other thing is, like, have you ever been to a restaurant and just had trash service or gotten food poisoning?
I've gotten food poisoning. I think I gave it to myself, but that's a different story.
So, but you went to a restaurant and had a really bad experience.
Yes, multiple times.
Okay. Did you ever stop? Have you stopped eating out?
No.
Are all restaurants the same?
No, definitely not.
I've had trash service at a particular restaurant and still went back to that same restaurant again.
Yeah. Forgiveness. You're like,
well,
the same server can't be there twice, can they?
Yeah. I mean, I might say, can I sit somewhere else?
Yeah.
But the reality is, we will write off a church, we will write off a person, we will write off a group of people because we have one negative encounter with them.
Mm-hmm. How do we move past that? I mean, what do we need to do? We've already established we need to be self-aware. We need to be, not consumed with ourselves, but aware of what is getting us moving in one direction or another. So when we come across those people, listen to me.
Those people.
The people that we don't agree with.
People, I like that.
That we don't agree with, aside from just dismissing them like, okay, we don't agree. I don't want to be a part of my life. How do we still reconcile that? Hey, we don't agree on everything, and we may have had a really big disagreement, but you're a child of God, I'm a child of God. We need to come together on some level, for the greater purpose. What's that look? I'm genuinely asking you this.
Well, I think it's such a layered and nuanced thing because it's relationship dependent. If you're talking about you have a relationship with this person, and your desire is to continue having a relationship with this person, if it's minor, we say it all the time that you can look at somebody and go, well, I've never thought of it that way.
Right.
Now, the reality is maybe I never thought of it that way because I just disagree with that thought process wholeheartedly.
Mm-hmm.
But in today's culture, so I don't care if somebody identifies as the color purple. I can give them their time, give them their due, give them their ability, and they can be waiting for me to just unload on them. And I can look at it and go, never thought of it that way. Period. That's not... I never thought of it that way because it's a stupid idea.
Right.
Or I never thought of it that way and you're wrong.
Right.
But to just literally go, I never thought of it that way.
Right. And
that'd be the period.
Giving them that value, that validation for them.
And what I would tell you is in this culture, I think you give somebody that and acknowledge that they had an opinion, opens the door for them to invite your opinion.
That's good, man.
And how much more weight does your thought, your belief carry in their world when it's invited in and it's not just hurled at them?
Yeah. You think, yeah.
So I think that's kind of step one to this layer of how we do it is communication.
How many guys does the guy standing on the corner with the bullhorn yelling about the end of the world's coming? How many people does he actually win over?
Well, so all right, I have a friend, Joshua Underwood, and
good guy.
So he gave me, and actually, you got to hear him kind of go through it. So if you're watching this, check the show notes because I'll put his information in there. But he gave me this analogy of communication and the way we communicate with each other is the difference between dodgeball and catch. And he does such a good job of unpacking it, but at its basic level, to play dodgeball, you need to have two people and a ball, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to play catch, at its most basic level, you need to have two people and a ball, right? So the context is the same. Now, I can take a major league pitcher and a toddler, and they can play catch together.
Yeah.
Because that pitcher is going to use all his strengths, all his talents, all his skills and abilities to deliver that ball to the toddler in a way that the toddler can receive it.
Right.
And then the toddler is going to do his very best to deliver it back to the pitcher, who is going to use all his skills, all his talents, all his strengths to receive it.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to stretch, he's going to bend, he's going to reach out, he's going to, the ball's way underthrown, he's going to take 10 steps forward to try and receive it.
Mm-hmm.
That's the idea of catch. Delivering in a way that I think will help you receive it. And when you put something back at me, I'm going to do everything I can to try and receive what you've thrown back at me. Whereas dodgeball,
Same two people
isn't going to end well for one of them.
Right.
Because I'm going to use all my skills, all my talents, all my abilities to beat you down.
Oh, thinking about Billy Madison.
Yeah, that's exactly the scene. Like just beating kids with a ball.
Right.
And then what, but as the receiver of that ball, what are you trying to do?
You're trying to miss it.
You're trying to deflect it.
Right, avoid it.
To avoid what I'm delivering to you.
Mm-hmm.
So if we go into disagreement playing dodgeball, now I can't control what the other person's doing.
Right.
I can only control me. And
that's a word for somebody right there.
That Dave needs to control himself?
No. We can't control the other person.
We can't control the other person.
Right.
We can only be responsible for and even in those conversations, we change the tone of that conversation to where it's like, I'm lobbing this thought at you. Hey man, you said X, Y, and Z. Well, like, what about this?
What about
And I lob this over to you. Now you grab that thing and you're like, rah, and you're hurling it right back at me.
Yeah.
What's my response to that? Do I instantly shift into dodgeball?
Right.
Or do I try my best to receive that thought and go, yeah.
That's really good. And that's so hard.
Like I said, it's probably the best analogy about communication and communication in this day and age.
Right.
Our pastor, Corey Demmel, he says it all the time in Disagreement, to rather not go into these conversations with, well, you said, or why did you, but to start with a conversation of, help me understand.
Yeah. Help me see it your way.
Yeah. Help me understand.
Right.
Well, I just thought that, and if both people are playing catch at that point, that help me understand allows you to feel like
kind of diffuses.
You can play catch with me, that I'm not, coming in with all, all the heat I can throw on a ball, that I'm just lost in something. Hey man, help me understand this.
So how do we go from that? Yeah, I'm just thinking practically. People listening to this, people watching that might be like, "Yeah, that sounds real good," but in a practical situation, I'm lobbing it, and they just keep hurling it back, and I keep lobbing it, and they're hurling it back. At what point do we, walk away from that conversation, that relationship, that interaction, in a healthy way?
Well, again, I think it depends on the level of relationship that you're talking about. I mean,
Right.
the last episode we talked about 30-year friendships,
Mm-hmm.
um, or your marriage. It might literally be we're not going to talk about it right now.
Right.
Like, let's come back to this.
We're both emotionally charged on this topic, so let's go to your corners.
But then we have, again, if we look at the Bible and not just the Bible in general, I love the filter of not what does the Bible say about it, what did Jesus say about it?
Yeah.
And you see that very clearly in Matthew 18.
Mm-hmm.
And, Matthew 18 is a layered thing. It's not a simple cut and dry. It's a layered thing. Because it says, when you have disagreement with somebody, you go to them. It doesn't say go and beat them in the head with their shortcomings or what you perceive as their shortcomings. Is go to them and try to be reconciled. Reconciliation is a two-player game.
Yeah.
It is catch. It is not dodgeball.
Mm-hmm.
It is not accusation. It's help me understand.
Yeah, I think a lot of people in that moment, like, okay, you've wronged me. I'm bringing it to you. And then it becomes that you need to see it my way. You need to validate me. You need to validate my hurt. And some people may not want to do that. Some people may just generally not see it that way, and like you say, bringing it says first go one-on-one.
Yeah.
And if they don't listen, then bring somebody else into it. Like, hey, you're removed from this situation. Here's their side. Here's my side. Let's try. Maybe I'm not seeing it rightly. Maybe I need someone else with a different point of view.
Yeah, mediator,
Right.
not teammate.
Right.
You're not bringing someone else to just prove your side. You're bringing someone who can mediate the conversation.
That's the point, is that you need that third party in there to be able to look at both sides objectively and provide input into the situation, and then obviously the third in that Matthew 18 scenario goes down to bringing the church into it. And that's something for us, as I haven't had a disagreement that big yet.
Well, and I think one thing we have to understand is the context of the conversation.
Yeah.
Jesus is talking to a community that is ruled by the church.
Right.
So in that respect, it's when he says take it to the church, he's talking about a community that allows that church to be the authority in their disputes,
Mm-hmm.
that they are the governing authority. So what does that look like in your office?
Right.
That's when you're, it seems weird, but you're going to HR and saying, hey, we have this conflict, we have this issue,
Mm-hmm.
And you're bringing it to them. And you're letting that ruling authority,
Mm-hmm.
whether that's the courts, that's the HR, or that's the church, because hey, we both go to the same church, we have this disagreement, hey pastor, can you come and give us this? But that only works when both people recognize the authority of the church, in this case, what Jesus is talking about, or like, hey, that guy's our boss, we're going to let him decide. You both have to be submissive to that authority in the context of Jesus there. That community he's discussing this with sees the church as the authority. They are going to rule on it, and both are going to be submissive and obedient to that ruling, is really how that comes down to. You're basically going, okay, we're at an impasse here. We want to be able to move past this issue. Pastor, boss, courts, what's the decision?
Mm-hmm.
And again, you can't control the other person. You control yourself to go, okay, what you say is what it is.
Right.
And you trust that, all authority comes from God. So you are willing to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the ultimate that Matthew 18 gets into is, if after all of that, you can't be reconciled because either you can't accept the terms of it and maybe there's some self-evaluation there,
Right.
or they refuse to accept the terms of it, and they decide to disregard the authority. It says to treat them as you would a pagan or a tax collector. So he's talking to Jews, and the division, the social division between a pagan or a tax collector, he's just saying, you don't have anything to do with them.
Yeah, you don't associate with them.
And that is a biblical directive for healthy boundaries in relationship.
Yeah.
You're just not going to go there with this person.
Yeah, I think that while you were talking, my mind kind of went to like coming to a friend about maybe a drinking problem or an addiction problem or something along those lines, and how we can win them
Addiction
over.
problems.
Right. And we all have something to an extent. You know, I recently heard a pastor of a podcast talking about how in the Old Testament they talk about idols. You know, in today's day and age, you could kind of replace that with addiction. You know, like we all have something that maybe we don't put before God, but it's close second. You know what I mean? You know, whether
Is that the Carey Nieuwhof one?
I think it was.
Yeah, Carey Nieuwhof.
I think it was.
So there's another one for the show notes.
Yeah.
Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast. That's legit.
You know, so when do we go from, man, I really love you, and I see this in your life, and it's going the wrong way, man. You're going down this path, and nah, man, I got this. Nah, man, I got this. You know, and like, hey, you know, Bill, come here. Let's talk to Dave about this. Not you in particular, but you know, oh, and I got this. And then, so living by biblical terms, you know, and I understand it's just a principle. You know, at what point does it? Well, man, we got to let this play out for him. You know, my love for you is so much that I'm going to allow you to destroy your own life. You know, because we see you've been arrested 3 times for this, bro. You know, like the next step is like a 5-year jail sentence. You know, this whatever that is. You know, and that's been me. You know, that is my testimony. You know, you can please don't look me up, but you know, there's some legal things in my background that led me to an epiphany point, you know, that breaking point where I was like, I can't do it on my own. God, please save me from myself, you know? And I know there was maybe 1 or 2 people, but I'm trying to think about how I wish more people would have, or maybe I would have given more authority to people in my life at that point, you know? So where's that go for us as we love somebody, they're going down a bad path. We're trying to bring them back, steer them back off of that road. And how do we do that?
Well, there's no clear cut, like on after this 3rd time we've had this conversation, I'm done.
Right.
But I think there is a breaking point in relationship where I come to you, man, I still love you. I still care about you. I'm for you, like we talked about in the last episode. I am for you. I want what's best for you. And it's like, if you're walking through a storm, bro, like I'm with you. I am in the storm with you. We are moving to a point, but I'm not going to stand in the rain.
Right.
It doesn't even have to be storming.
Right.
It's just raining. But all you're doing is standing there. Man, I don't need to stand in the rain next to you. So I would say where is that line? It's, I can come to you 100 times, but when the situation becomes detrimental to me.
Okay.
So, because I can have boundaries in our relationship to go, no, man, I'm not giving you any money.
Right.
Because you drank away your entire paycheck.
Right.
You're in debt up to your eyeballs, and you're now drinking on credit. So no, I'm not going to. I'm not going to pay your car payment for you. Right. So I can have those boundaries and still be there for you and in relationship with you, and we can still work out together and do whatever. But as it starts to harm me,
okay,
then I think I have to look at I still care about you, but I can't enable,
right,
and I can't let your actions harm me.
Yeah.
So I'm going to protect, my well-being.
There's a proverb about that, right?
I think there's some words somewhere in a book.
Yeah.
Somewhere between the front cover and the back cover. And if you're new to Bible study, that's the best way to quote it and be like, there's this thing. It says it's between the first page and the last page, and you won't be wrong, most likely. But yeah, I think that's to answer your question about like how do we draw that line.
Mm-hmm.
I think where am I willing to sweat and bleed for the benefit of our friendship?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
100%. Yeah.
But am I going to bleed out just to say that I'm in relationship
or allow
with
you to cut me in those moments? Yeah. That's a really good analogy. Thanks, man. Thanks.
Well, there's something to chew on. Hangers for less. Tired of your clothes looking like they lost a wrestling match with the floor? Introducing the revolutionary hanger. Yes, it's just a hanger. But trust us, it'll make you feel like an adult who actually folds laundry. Available wherever responsible people shop. I don't know where that's at. Probably next to socks you'll never match. Hangers for less. All right, so before those tantalizing ads for our fictional sponsors, we're getting into that taking the principles of Matthew 18 and applying them in our lives is just remember, like, this isn't, we have to look sometimes beyond the words. We have to look at the principles that are being presented. And really the principle here is it's a call to unity in unity. And of all places, I got it at Target, which, talk about layers of conversation that could create. But it is a call to unity amid disagreement. And in order to have that, we have to see the other party as an equal, at the very least an equal, if not valuing them above you,
us.
which again, principles. And it's a principle about reconciliation. Again, reconciliation is a two-player game. Forgiveness is a one-player game.
Right.
So if you're involved in an issue and the other party just wants no part in reconciliation, you can't force their hand. You can't convince them to come to the table. So you can forgive. That's for your benefit.
That is.
Their forgiveness is your benefit, your health, your mental health, your emotional health, your spiritual health, all of that. But you pray for that opportunity for reconciliation, that two-player game, and to be reconciled brings it back to unity. Or I would say that's the thought that we need to have unity.
Yeah.
But we don't necessarily, we can still be unified in disagreement, and we can be unified in purpose and still have boundaries between us.
Right.
Would you agree?
Absolutely, man. And we see that play out in Paul and Barnabas' life. You know, they are unified in Acts. They come together, and Paul gets that radical transformation, and then he actually kind of disappears off the scene for a little while. Barnabas goes and finds him, brings him back to the church, and then those two together make their way around the Mediterranean, planting churches and everything. And then they come to that point where, hey, I want to go this way, I want to go this way. And
what's funny is they have a disagreement about a relationship, about somebody else.
Yeah. And at that point, they agree to disagree, move in opposite directions, not necessarily wanting ill on the other. They're both still for the kingdom, both still for the purpose, but they're able to have disunity, I guess, disagreements while still having unity in that, because they want what's best for the kingdom and ultimately what's best for one another.
Well, and it's interesting because Scripture doesn't tell us what they, like, how he, it basically says they disagreed so much that they went their separate ways.
Sharply is the word.
Yeah, sharply. So it's not like, oh, no, man, I really want to see this area of the countryside. Oh, no, man, I want to go to this. All right, man, I'll catch you later. You know, it wasn't, it says they disagreed sharply. And we don't get the Jerry Springer details. But it says that there was a division between them. But what we do know from the Bible and from extra biblical texts, other historical references, that where you see these two still on mission, planting churches, neither one of them's undermining the other. And that's a principle that we need to be aware of as Christians, because the church that we go to together is not the first church we've ever been to.
That's true.
And which means
together.
Oddly enough. So it's an opportunity to realize that, churches are not street gangs. You can switch churches and not hate the previous one.
Right.
You can disagree with something that happened there. You can disagree greatly with way someone was treated or how an outcome of a situation happened. You can disagree with all that and still not try to undermine them. Again, that whole idea of people outside the church see us as all one big body, but on the inside, you're over here actively trying to saw off this limb because you used to be on the hand, but now you're in the shoulder, so you're just trying to cut it off at the elbow.
I'm the pinky toe knuckle man. You know that.
Again, that's a whole other conversation.
No, we're talking about Paul and Barnabas, and Paul even lays that out in another passage. I don't have it here, but you were talking about it, where he's like, you were baptized in Cephas and you were baptized by Apollos, but we're all under the same umbrella, essentially, is what he's saying. So we need to understand that when we disagree, we still want best for the other person. That's the reconciliation. That is dying to self. That is growing as a human being self-aware enough to be able to look and go, all right, I don't agree with everything you say, and we're actually not going to talk anymore, but I definitely want the best for you in your life. I love your wife, love your kids, but, whatever that may be, we're just not going to do it. And, most times that doesn't happen in a audible thing like that. It's just kind of, we just drifted apart. I don't see that guy anymore, and if you probably trace that back, there was probably a disagreement in either verbal or a lifestyle or something like that, to where that happens. And in our culture today, there's ghosting someone.
Ghosting somebody, and how many relationships could have persisted.
Right.
And when I say relationship, I'm not talking about like romantic relationships, friendships that could have persisted and moved towards that 30-year friendship and the benefits of the 30-year friendship. If you just would have gone to somebody, I can think of
communication, man.
Yeah, I think of a guy who I called him up out of the blue, and I was like, "Hey, man, I need to chat with you about something." I had basically been told some really upsetting information about him, so that affected my perception of him and made me wonder, like, is this guy for real? Like, because he's never mentioned any of this stuff over here, but I valued him. I valued his relationship. And it's like, hey man, let's meet up, have lunch. We sit down and I remember him afterwards saying it was the worst, best conversation he had ever had.
Yeah.
Because now not everything I'd been told was accurate. Right. It was a twist on the situation. And some of it was, he doesn't advertise it, but he doesn't shrink away from it either. Right. So to sit down and for the two of us to chew through that and get to the other side of it, now it's all out on the table. We're laid bare. and him say like that was the best, worst conversation ever. He hated having to get into the weeds with me. But what he knew was like, I'm down for this friendship. I don't want to just know the person you are now. Like I want to know how you became the person that you are now. I want to know your past so I can understand you more deeply and know on the other side, I don't see you any different.
With that John Orpert, that Carey Nieuwhof podcast, he had that line in there where said, you can only be loved as much as you are known. He had talked about that exact thing, bearing all to somebody, and the guy, and they kind of being like, well, what do you think about me now? And the guy's response being, I've never loved you more than I have right now, because I never knew you enough. We always keep these little walls up. We always protect ourselves from being hurt, and inadvertently, by doing that, by not bearing ourselves out, we are excluding someone that might be able to help us through
absolutely
time or trouble. We're talking about that. I just got this thought. There's another side to this coin. We're talking about unity and disagreement and trying to be a friend to somebody. There's other relationships that you need to remove from your life, and this isn't even in our notes. It was just something I was thinking about as we were going through this. Like, I kind of shared a little bit about, my testimony being involved in drugs and alcohol and stuff like that. And when I did get clean and sober, there were people I had to eliminate from my life because they didn't have what was best for me, and you're going to have those people that latch on and try to bring you down. It's like the example, the visual, like you stand up on a chair and you try and pull somebody up on the chair and they try and pull you down. Which one's easier? It's easier to pull you off the chair than lift somebody up, and there's always, not always, maybe it's just me, those relationships where like, that's just not healthy, and you may need to trim the fat on some of those unhealthy relationships. And maybe that other person doesn't want to be trimmed away,
Well, and I think that's a little bit what we already talked about, where do you go your separate ways when it starts to be a detriment to you,
right?
And the growth you're being called to,
right?
And where you're being led. So I think that's part of it. But I think the other thing we have to remember is even the way we perceive those people. Those people. And you've heard me say it before, you got to be careful with the word they. Because in somebody else's story, you are they.
You are they, yeah.
I am they, Ben is they, we are they.
I am.
But so like the people you're talking about that are trying to pull you down, it's not because they're trying to destroy you.
Right.
They're trying to hold on to you because they actually love you.
Right.
They care about you. They want your friendship. They want your companionship, but they want the current version of it.
They don't want the growth.
They don't want that growth.
Right.
Even when, you go back, 18-ish years ago, 19 years ago, when I kind of found my way back to church, starting to have those conversations with friends, it's like, oh man, you should come check out this church.
Yeah.
And next thing you know, I'm not getting invited to parties anymore.
Right.
Because I'm the church guy, because I've tried to, win these guys over. And it's funny with that because, and I've had the conversation since then with people that I invite to church, and I stopped worrying, like, yeah, maybe they're not going to call me back.
Right.
Maybe they don't want to hang out with me. I don't care. Because at the end of the day, if you're my friend, and I've said this to people where it's like, do you believe that I believe what I'm saying?
Yeah, I've heard you say that.
And because if you believe that I believe it, I don't care I'm not saying what you believe about what I believe about. Do you believe that I believe that Jesus is real, that there is a heaven and hell, we are going to answer for the way we live, and it matters whether or not you accept, Jesus' lordship in your life. If you believe that I believe all that's true, and I haven't invited you to church, I haven't tried to talk to you about faith, I haven't brought this before you, you should be personally offended.
Right.
Because how much do I have to hate you to not want that for you?
That's a word for some people that don't share their faith. Like closet Christians, where
Like, am I more concerned about your perception of me than I am about the salvation of your soul?
Right.
I'm not talking about like, I'm going to beat you in the head with this.
No.
I can still be respectful of your statement of, nah, man, it's not my thing.
Yeah.
Okay. But open invite.
Right. If you've been working at a place for 7 years and then somebody found out that you're a Christian, would they be surprised with that? You
Right.
know, like, oh, I didn't have no idea. So you claim to be this, you share this.
You go to church?
Yeah. and
that would be a dagger.
That would be that. And it should be at that point in your life, you know? So yeah, there's those times when we need to be outward.
You guys got an example of that, man? That's like, you guys got to dig into that one, man.
Like, disembodied Nick says. So like, if you're like, oh, come to church. You go to church? Because I'm looking at your social media right now. And
that doesn't look churchy.
That is not the church lady that. So,
right.
Yeah.
Now,
so
I don't have that example. And
I think that is the example.
I you know, in my personal life, and I'm thankful for that. That, you know, I'm open at my business place, my workplace, you know, and when I did come to Jesus, I worked in a different place and went through that same thing where, you know, we're all going to the bar after. You're not going though, you know, those type of things, which at the time I was like, yeah, you're right. I don't want to do that. But being able to be open and honest about your faith, not being afraid of that is, I think that's liberating in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
You know, being able to, this is me. You know, we talk about bearing it all with close friends, but even living your life in that way where love it or hate it, you know, that's kind of always been my thing. You know, the one thing you love about me is the one thing you'll hate about me. It's honesty.
Well, you know, I hate to say it, I do have the example. When I first started
Please, Dave, tell us.
Well, when I was first starting to go back to church, people from work who knew me for years, you know, I was a SWAT team guy, gun range guy. Like I could be a little aggressive and intense at times. And it's hard to believe, right? But it was funny, and this is how I know it was a God thing. Is there were two specific conversations where I just made the comment about church. I made some reference, like one was literally like, oh, I saw you, you know, I passed you in the Starbucks parking lot the other day. And he's like, oh, I didn't know you lived over in that area of town. No, I was on my way to church. And he says, oh, you go to church?
Yeah. Ooh.
But then the next time it happened that somebody said, oh, you go to church? The same guy's in the room and he busted out laughing.
This guy?
He busts out laughing because he heard twice somebody say, you go to church?
Yeah.
In a like confused kind of way. And it was very convicting to me.
Yeah.
He thought it was funny, and he's a Christian guy. He's been a Christian, and in my opinion, he was like the Ned Flanders Christian, like okily dokily neighbor. I now see that as a compliment. At the time, it was me poking fun.
Right.
But he, you know, laughed. That was not lost on me. But what it took was a dose of humility on my part a couple weeks later to ask him to sit down with me in my office. And I said, okay, this happened. You remember that? And he chuckled. He's like, yeah. I was like, why is it so hard for people to believe that I go to church?
Right.
And I had to, that was like, okay,
right.
Here's the scalpel.
Right.
What's the thing that has to get cut open?
Right. Okay, so we talked about one of the biggest things in navigating disagreements and disunity is communication. Communication is hard. You know, you gave us the reference between dodgeball and catch, which is awesome, you know, and again, we'll put the show notes in there to get you to Joshua Underwood. Being able to disagree without being disagreeable, you know, that's key to maintaining good standing in any relationship.
So, but before we go too far, because that's a cool soundbite, disagree without being disagreeable.
Right.
Because I want to make sure, I think it's important that people understand that you can disagree and not be disagreeable in the sense that, like, we've all been around that guy who just wants to argue every point. Be like, you could be like,
sometimes I can be that guy.
Well, but like you just want to argue about everything, and
Yeah.
these guys are just so contentious about the, if you say Browns are the best team ever,
Which they are.
I'm not sure that you have the facts to back that up.
In my heart of hearts, I know. One day.
So that would be the thing. Like, I could come at you and be like, no, they suck.
Yeah, no.
That's kind of
Let's look at your
disagreeable.
record over the last
Be
10
like,
years. Shut up.
All right, so let's
I know.
unpack that for me. What are you basing that on?
Right.
So I'm disagreeing, but not being disagreeable.
Right. Yeah.
So, but go ahead.
So yeah, no, you're right. And we're always going to run into those people that are just, they enjoy the disagreement. They thrive on that. And I'm kind of, I guess, referring more to those communications when we're not in that situation, when we just, no, I kind of want to see it that way. There's a few kind of points that we kind of dug up in our research and everything. And I think one of the main ones is to choose your battles, to disagree without being disagreeable is, what, is it that important? My wife's grandfather had a saying like, 5 years from now, is that really going to matter? No.
Okay. Is every hill worth dying on?
Exactly. It's not. And not every disagreement needs to be vocalized. Sometimes somebody can say something and you just, okay. And just walk away from that. You can just, being able to see where that road's leading you down,
So just like there's that phrase of, I never thought of it that way.
Right.
I literally did this at work the other day. I have this exchange with another supervisor, just a decision that was being made.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately we left it to our boss to make the decision.
Yeah.
But at the end of it, I just looked at him and said, I disagree.
Yeah. You're stupid. Goodbye.
Well, but it wasn't nasty. He was still trying to prove his point and win me over. So how do we sidestep that? Yeah. I disagree.
And that's it.
And that's
it. It doesn't have to be rude. It doesn't have to be
like conversation. I disagree.
Right.
Period.
Which leads us into the next one, is being gracious in those disagreements. You can walk away, choosing your battles and being gracious, like you say, that exact example, like, I disagree, and walk away, or being able to listen to them and realizing, hey,
that's one I'm really good at. I listen so well when people are talking. I don't ever just wait for my opportunity to talk. I'm just a listener deep down inside. I'm a listener. That's who I am. It's what I do.
Could you expound upon that, Dave?
What were you saying?
Right. No. Right. Being able to hear what they're saying, not just, like you say, waiting to jump in.
Yeah.
And again, that references that catch metaphor analogy.
Yeah.
That would be an analogy, right?
Yeah.
I'm not real good at the
metaphorically speaking,
right? The one that always gets me, the one which you may have just spoken to, is listen more, talk less, right? James, one of your favorite books in the Bible. You've led Bible studies on that. You reference James all the time. My dear brothers and sisters, understand this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger. For human anger does not accomplish God's righteousness. And ultimately, us being Christian men, we are trying to be righteous in God's eyes, and being able to zip it, open them up, and what's the saying? You got 2 ears and one mouth for a reason.
Yeah.
So I think that, and that's hard, and just like you just gave us that example, many times in any conversation or any, argument, especially disagreement, you're just waiting for them to, so I can jump in with my point, just take a breath. I double dog dare you, finish that sentence and I'm on it, so being able to just stop, allow them to speak. Never thought of it that way. Listen, and we just had the Bible series on Nehemiah, how about a prayer before you speak? God, Just, it could be a quick one, in the middle of the conversation. Please let me have this word, walk with me. Let these be your words, and slow to speak, slow to anger, quick to listen. I think those are things that we could use in every facet of our lives,
Rather than it being the firefight
Right.
where you're lobbing rounds at me, I duck behind cover, and while you're lobbing all that at me, I'm just over here reloading.
Yeah.
Okay, he's out, my turn. And
Right.
now I'm going to start hurling stuff at you. Like,
Right.
my only thought in that moment is, how am I preparing my argument to come back at you?
Right.
The only weight I'm giving your statements is how I can turn them back against you.
Yeah.
Well, you just said,
Yeah.
but now you're
Right.
And I'm looking to turn every one of those into a club to beat you in the head with.
Yeah. And that does not have their best interest in mind, which was one of the things we talked about at the beginning, know. And I just alluded to it a little bit, but think before you speak. Fools give full vent to their rage, but the wise bring calm in the end. Being able to namaste right here and let you just talk about it. You know what I mean? It's so easy to just, like you say, as they're talking, like, oh, there's a trigger point. I know I can hurt them with this one. As they're speaking, like, oh, I got something for that. Here's my rebuttal, and before you start hurling haymakers at them, and going for the knockout punch, let's just think about it. Are we valuing that person in that moment? Are we valuing this relationship in that moment? Or are we just trying to win,
Well, and I think that's, tangibly speaking, if we're in that moment and you hear that thing like, oh, I got him because he said this and now he's saying this, even your response, if you're being thoughtful of the person, your response could be, okay, hey, hang on a second. Help me understand this, because you said, and you said, help me understand
how do they go together?
How do those two ideas not oppose each other? Help me understand that.
Right.
Oh, well, and it literally may be they didn't think before they spoke and they blurted something out, or it's you've given them a chance to correct something that you would have seen as this guy's an idiot. He's talking out both sides of his mouth,
which can be true.
It can be. But to help me understand that, like, I think that's such a good approach to giving them that. And it's not, I'm not clubbing you in the head with either of these statements. Help me understand this.
Yeah.
And it's done genuinely, not like, oh yeah, well then help me understand why you said this and this, when I could just say, okay, hang on, wait, help me understand this, because I feel like you're saying two different things. So but that requires us to be humble and care about the person.
Right.
Not so much the argument.
Yeah, I think that humility, we started with that a little bit, and I think that is key in any relationship. It that leads to that self-awareness that allows us to see other people, value other people, and see ourselves in the right light. Like, now obviously there can be humility that's, self-detrimental, like humble to the point of like, I'm worthless, I can't do anything.
Well, false humility.
False humility, yeah. Understanding where you're at in your life, understanding who you are in your, where you're at in your walk with God, and being able to convey that in a loving manner in every relationship that you have, it is, I think that's a good place to be when it comes to humility.
Well, and that is going to seep into other areas of our life, other areas of that relationship, and allow us to work towards finding, again, we don't need to agree on everything. We don't have to make the same decisions, but that desire to have common ground with somebody where we can keep the main things, and when you and I are both fixated on the end goal, which is to try and live a life worthy of the sacrifice of Christ on the cross. So if we're trying to live a life worthy of that, then we're not going to get so wrapped around the axles over minor things or my preference.
Right. And that's a great analogy, the wrapped around the axles, because what that ultimately does is make the car stop. You know, you get mower or whatever gets wrapped around there, the car stops moving, and both of us suffer in that.
Yeah.
You know, I like that. Sorry to
interrupt
you.
But it's the just that idea of how many of these we're having a disagreement over my preference about something. And if you're really being humble in a biblical sense, is my preference really all that important? And and I would say universally, we'd all agree, no. It's
not.
In God's story, no one human person is so important that the story hinges around them. God can use anybody. He has used anybody.
And even that one person wasn't out for himself. I do my Father's will. You know, he ultimately, you know, you have BC and AD or BC and BCE, you know. But that human that walked the earth and that we call our Savior, he was not in it for himself, even though he had every power to be, you know, and was given opportunities to be repeatedly, you know. He always met people where they were, you know, disagreed in a loving manner for the most part. You know, he did flip some tables, you know, that's my guy, you know, but ultimately, you know, the axis that our world spins on gives us the example of I am for you and I put you above me, and every day in every way I die to myself.
So then realistically, again, like we wrapped up our last episode, just that thing to chew on, the concept that we can carry for the next, you know, several weeks that we start working into our daily is how do we have 30-year relationships? Well, we find a way to disagree healthily and maintain unity. How do we do that? I think it leads to humility, that having a true biblical, humble perspective of self, what's preference, what's principle, and to really start leaning into that idea of humility, because that allows us to see others at the very least as equals.
Yeah, I agree, man. Humility is where it begins, and in most cases where it ends. You know, being able to disagree without being disagreeable, have ultimate unity in mind in every relationship, needs for you and me and everybody watching to have that humility to be able to put others first, man. I think that's a great place to end it, man.
Well, before we go, I just want to give a quick shout out to everybody who took the time to dive into the first episode. In less than 3 days, we had over 100 views and listens. We're expanding our reach in the sense of this is all published on YouTube, but we're getting more on the audio sites, Apple and Amazon, Spotify, SoundCloud, just to make it a little more easily accessible. But we just want to give a shout out to all of you who engaged in the trailer and in the first episode, because we're going to be here anyways, but we love that you guys are getting some benefit out of it and that you're enjoying the content. So what I would ask you is throw some comments down below and give us an opportunity. Let us know what topics would you want to hear Ben and I chat about? What items are weighing on you? Or did we miss the mark on this idea of unity and disagreement?
Absolutely.
Disagree without being disagreeable, and don't hurt our feelings. We're sensitive.
Thanks, guys.
This has been a presentation of Something to Chew On, a production of Rev 21 Media LC, created by the three amigos, Ben Garcia, Dave Drum, and Nick Smiloff. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time, keep chewing on the good stuff.
Are we for real?
So many jokes.
Woo! Mushroom hats. Want to turn heads and start conversations you never asked for? Try the mushroom hat. It's fashionable. It's fungy-tastic. And it might just get you mistaken for a video game character. Embrace the mushroom life, because standing out is better than blending in. Mushroom hats.